is your call to action. Get prepared, America. Economy, survival, energy, disasters. This is USAPrepares.com. Informative radio, educational radio. Interact now by emailing instructor@USAPrepares.com or text at 434-390-7953. Class, please take your seats. Now, your instructor, Vincent Finelli.
Oh, man. This is going to be a lot of fun. Everyone all set? Cocked? Locked? Today, we're here to teach elementary school and to protect our children. Here we go. Your dial set correctly to USAPrepares.com. We're broadcasting 2 hours daily from high atop the Missouri Ozark Mountains. It's a link to all of your instructors on the website, USAPrepares.com. Podcasts on Genesis are free. If you need to refresh your memory or revisit or share something that you've heard on this broadcast, just click on USAPrepares.com. Converging threats are confronted daily by your instructors. I'm Vincent Finelli. Tom is producing the broadcast in Minnesota. In 1960, Isaac Asimov, a world-renowned scientist, came to the elementary school I attended. Our class learned about the atom and our future, which included nuclear power. I took copious notes. 50 years later, I still have that notebook. My parents made sure they kept it for me. Today, it's our turn. Dr. Richard Allen Miller, lead physicist for the United States Navy at the Pentagon, is with us. He's the real Fox Mulder of the X-Files. I just found out that Rick is not connected yet. But today we're teaching our version of the Isaac Asimov class that I was part of over 50 years ago. So today we're going to do something that's not been done before. We're teaching 6th grade science, live and worldwide. Dr. Miller will be in the first chair. And I'd like to tell you about a wonderful person I met. I met Grace Thorne, a 6th grade science teacher at our Get Prepared Expos. She's been to our seminars, our meetups, and our banquet dinners. She comes from out of state to Missouri to be with us. She's one of us. And if you could select a teacher for your children, I'm certain that Grace Thorne would be one. Grace Thorne does something that few teachers would even consider doing. She plays the radio for 2 hours in our classroom on Thursdays when Dr. Miller teaches science at USAPrepares.com. Today we're taking Grace's class to the next level. Our students are with us. We've moved the class into the superintendent's office, and they're on the phone with us. The name of our school today is Ryan Public School in Ryan, Oklahoma. Our superintendent is Larry Ninman. Our principal, Pete Maples. Our parents of the students are to be congratulated for approving of this class. It's a worldwide class, and thousands will be listening and learning. Grace Thorne's with us. Welcome, Grace. Do we have Grace Thorne? I have a feeling that our producer is feverishly trying to connect Dr. Richard Allen Miller and Grace Thorne. And what we're going to be doing is we'll be asking students to present their questions one at a time. Great. We've got the students. And are we connecting Dr. Miller? Okay. All right. So Tom is working feverishly to connect Dr. Richard Allen Miller, and we have the students with us. Grace Thorne, welcome to the broadcast. We're connecting Dr. Richard Allen Miller, and he'll be with us shortly. But welcome to the broadcast.
Thank you, Vincent.
Grace, I've got to ask you, while we're getting Dr. Miller on the line, he's on the West Coast right now. Why is it that you have decided to bring USA Prepares into your classroom on Thursdays?
Well, Dr. Miller can talk to these kids about some things that are way above me, and I know they wonder about things that I maybe not can give them the best answer, but he always seems to answer something that we've been talking about or wondering about, and so I just feel like we all learn something when we listen to him.
Well, we're glad to have you as part of USAPreparedness.com. And what do the parents think about you playing the radio in your classroom? I mean, that's highly unusual. You're probably the only teacher in sixth grade America who does that.
Well, I didn't ask permission to play the radio, but I don't think they care. But they all signed the permission slip for their child to be on this program, so I feel like I have all their approval.
Yeah, well, that's great. So, class, as we get toward the portion where Dr. Richard Allen Miller is with us, and we're trying to connect with him right now, as we get to that point, bear in mind we'd only like you to use your first name. Do not use your last name. And I'd like to ask the class, we've made special arrangements with Ms. Thorne to skip the test on today's science class. Is that okay with you, class?
Yeah, very good.
Grace, how did you go about formulating the questions that you've come up with for today's class? What went into the process? Were there any restrictions, any limits, or did you just ask the students to come up with one question per student or multiple questions per student?
Well, yes, we started out with the students. They thought of two questions of their own. Mm-hmm. Then as I read their questions, it would bring something to my mind that I thought would be a good question too, and so we just kind of put them all together and came up with what we have.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Well, I'll tell you what. I saw a list of some of the questions that you've compiled, and they are extraordinary questions. These students are thinking way beyond what I would expect an 11-year-old to ask. Absolutely extraordinary. Let's talk about how long did it take you to formulate these questions? And I see that we have 32 questions. How long was that process? Did you start a week ago and have the children start thinking about the most important burning questions in their minds, or did this just take 10 minutes?
No, it took longer than 10 minutes. And at first I'd like to say, I don't think we give these kids enough credit for the way they do think. And you talk about our education system being dumbed down. Mm-hmm. And, I think sometimes we don't, if we could just turn them loose and let them do and find out what they wanted to know and work on things they wanted to work on, we would be surprised beyond measure, I think. And so we started, as soon as I heard from you about doing this program, the next day we started working on our questions. So we've been working about a week on them, and we've been practicing, trying to speak clearly and speak loudly and and all that. And so, yeah, we've been working about a week getting ready for this.
Well, Grace, I want to tell you that this is exciting for me. It really is. And I hope that this is just the first of the classes that we teach on the air. I really hope that it really is just the first of many. And because it involves public speaking, it involves working well in a team with others. I know you've taken over the superintendent's office, and he has got to be supporting this. Your principal's got to be supporting it. So, Rick, Dr. Richard Allen Miller is with us. Rick, welcome. Welcome to chair number one.
And good morning, Grace. I am so proud of you, and I think what you're doing is, like Vincent said, is very, very cool. I just arrived, so I didn't get to hear all of it. I just came in toward the last of when you did it. Having trouble keeping all the lines going.
Well, Dr. Richard Allen Miller, Why don't we start with the first question? Grace, if you can have your students get ready, let's start with question number 1 for Dr. Richard Allen Miller. Please go ahead.
Hi, my name is Samantha. Do you think anyone will ever do anything about the nuclear power plants in the United States?
That's an excellent question. In fact, it is a massive concern to everybody. Samantha, I'm impressed, and I love your accent. It's so charming. Even as a child, it's just lovely. Electricity and our romance with electrical current is going to get us all in trouble, because Matt Stein has actually written several books, When Disaster Strikes, When Technology Fails. And at the heart of it are the capacitors on the national grid that, if they blow up from a coronal mass ejection, these are like these computer spikes that will burn out transmissions of communication and things like that. It will take the grid down. And the problem is that capacitor is so hybrid in its building that it's going to take a minimum of 2 years to replace it, and if it goes. And so, of course, they've got it, with massive different kinds of protection on it, but it is not inconceivable that if we get a massive coronal ejection from the sun, that won't fly, and then everybody's without power. And so I guess there's nothing that will shield that at this time in our lives, in our technology, in our time in history. We do not yet have technology that can protect us from that event. And as such, I think every single person should be prepared to have water. Because, if the power goes out, how do you pump the water out of the ground? There's a lot of just simple, basic questions. Very good question. And my answer is, I don't think there is anything we can do now.
Samantha, thanks for your question. Dr. Richard Allen Miller is with us. Grace Thorne is with us. And we are teaching class, Ryan Public School, Ryan, Oklahoma, 6th grade. We'll be right back. Have your questions ready. Class, this is a lot of fun for Dr. Richard Allen Miller, Grace Thorne, and me, for absolute certainty. Samantha had a great question on nuclear power in the United States. Here we have an 11-year-old concerned about nuclear power. I think maybe our future's in pretty good hands with our students at Ryan Public School in Ryan, Oklahoma. Education reform, starting right here, right now, class. It is. Grace, why don't we go with our second question? Who's up next?
Sure.
Hi, this is Mackenzie. What happens in our bodies when we drink Coke?
Feel the curves. That used to be an advertisement. Well, you know the little story you did where you put a rusty nail in your Coke and what happens next. Imagine what that's doing in your body. And it gets worse because the acidity is such that it requires water to come out of your bone marrow in order to digest. And so that Coke is so toxic as to be one of the leading causes for diabetes and obesity in our country today. I think that all soft drinks are toxic, and that I personally no longer drink them. I used to like the Coke. It used to be the pause that refreshes. It's not at all like that at all. And all you have to do is look at people that are drinking Coca-Cola and other kinds of soft drinks, and what does their body look like?
Mackenzie, that's an absolutely brilliant question. And here, I have a question for you. Based on what you've just learned from Dr. Miller, would you consider continuing drinking Coke if you drink, or would you just say no?
No.
It's a difficult thing to do, making that transition. You know, one of the other questions was about addiction, and, you know, it follows with Coca-Cola. Basically, your body likes that carbonation, but in fact, it's acidic, and as such, it fools the body, and then do you know how much sugar is in a single can of Coca-Cola? Probably more than 7 heaping teaspoons of sugar. You don't even put that on your cereal. You know, it's really quite bad for you.
Mackenzie, do you have a follow-up question?
No.
Okay. Good. Thank you very much. Good question.
Absolutely. And Grace, who's up next?
Bryant is up next.
Okay, let's go.
Hi, Dr. Miller. My name is Bryant. Can people be frozen for hundreds of years and live again?
Well, that was a good question. It used to be cryogenics. That's what they called cryogenics, where they would freeze you like they would a hot dog. The problem is when you freeze something, the water in your body expands just like ice does. And as such, it breaks the cell walls. They cause them to explode just like a piece of plastic. When you freeze water in plastic, and the bottle then cracks because the ice expanded. When it does that, it'll do that in the body as well, and your cell walls are fragmented. And so, no, cryogenics as we have it today is not possible. Now, they're experimenting with what we call stasis, where we put you into a kind of sleep where all your body functions are working normally, only slowed way down. And that is new directions that have not yet been developed, but everybody would like to think they would. Nice question. It's about water and expansion of water when it turns to ice.
Brian, do you have a follow-up question?
No.
Okay.
Yeah, no, this is good.
Well,
I'm
Rick,
impressed with their insight and their way of seeing things. I'm impressed.
I am too. Class, Grace Thorne is a 6th grade elementary school teacher in Ryan, Oklahoma. She and her class have taken over the superintendent's office. They're on the speakerphone, and they've formulated 2 hours worth of questions for Dr. Richard Allen Miller. Class, parents, did you ever wonder what your children are thinking? Now you know. They're very involved in thinking about what we've done on our collective planet. I'm impressed. I am really impressed with the questions. Grace Thorne is teaching class right here with us at usaprepares.com, live, worldwide. This broadcast is being carried on a satellite that covers Canada, the United States, Mexico, Central America, the islands, worldwide on 2 internet radio networks and 3 radio stations. It's carried throughout the night and throughout the day, all over America. And it's available on podcasts, and you can listen live or later on your smartphone. Grace Thorne's with us. Grace, what's our next question? What student is up next? Which one?
This is Kaylee.
Hi, and I was wondering what really happened in Fukushima.
Yeah, well, Fukushima experienced a movie that you can go watch with called the China Syndrome. Now, that means that when hot radiation gets loose from a container, with cooling and things like that, it burns its way all the way to China. It burns a hole through the earth. There is nothing to stop it. And that is essentially what Japan's Fukushima event was about. That reactor 4, what happened is General Electric had put these spent plutonium rods into open pit swimming pools to keep them cool, and then they pump water through there. When the grid went down, when there was the big storm in Japan and they lost power, they could no longer cool those rods, those spent plutonium rods. And here's the bad news. And so it went critical. And when it went critical, it was out of control. And now, today, it's leaking radiation into the Pacific Ocean. To such an extent, there is now a warning about eating fish from the Pacific. I personally no longer eat fish. I grew up on the West Coast. I'm a Boy Scout that made Eagle as a sea explorer, so I love fish and I live on the beaches, and I can no longer eat things from my ocean. And I'm going to put a caution out there until we know more about what's going on. I would be very careful with the foods that you're eating. Most of the foods you should eat should come from your local garden, not from Mexico or from, South America. That's where most of our food comes from, is from other countries. And right now, this is a good excuse to begin changing your diet and your food choices. Nice question.
Great question. Do you have a follow-up for that?
Yes. Could that ever happen here?
Yes, it could. In fact, that is, again, the concern of Matt Stein when he wrote his important paper, 400 Chernobyls. There are 17 reactors very similar to Fukushima that are on the Madrid fault line, including Oklahoma. And with that said, I would guess that it starts with kids like you telling your parents, why do we need nuclear energy, and close those plants down now. Because when General Electric designed those things, the spent plutonium rod pools were meant to be a temporary solution, leaving the final solution, unfortunately, to you. And that was absolutely incorrect. That means that now you need to go into the sciences and figure out how to correct the mistakes we made.
Grace, I've got a question for you. Do you have in your classroom a copy of Matt Stein's book, When Technology Fails?
I have the book. I've never taken it to class.
Okay. What I was going to suggest is that I'd like to see if I can get an autographed copy of that book that Dr. Richard Allen Miller's talking about for your students to look at and for you to keep.
Yeah, I have copies here I can send her that Matt left with me. No problemo. I can do that for her. And that would be a library copy so that the kids, if they want to, can go into it like an encyclopedia and look up things like Fukushima and things like that. I don't know that Fukushima is covered in the book, but it does talk about plutonium and the problems we have with reactors. This whole thing, nuclear energy is a wrong way to go in technology, and the grid is electrical current. That means they are using nuclear energy to create electricity, both of which need to be revisioned by people like you.
Okay. Rick, what we've learned today is nuclear power is dangerous. We've learned that the Pacific Ocean has been contaminated with radioactivity, which could really harm us. So we are not going to eat food from the Pacific Ocean until the warning and watch is lifted. And we've learned that Coke is off limits. Is that correct, class?
Yeah.
Hey, Rick, we just
Now
lost
let's talk about aliens or something.
we just lost 2 sponsors, General Electric and Coca-Cola.
Good places to start your boycotting. If you have nuclear power plants in Oklahoma, I would begin as a class writing your congressman, asking him to protect you personally from these serious problems. Put it on them. They're the ones that make the laws, and the only way those laws are changed is by your voice.
You know what would be interesting, Rick? If we do a future class and the students, if Grace wants to do it, if she wants to have her students write letters to their congressmen and senators, that would be really interesting. And then we could read those letters aloud right here on the broadcast, and the congressman should have no problem understanding that we're serious about this.
I'll tell you, your show is listened to. I have people now and fans from Vincent Finelli in Australia and New Zealand, and then in Switzerland and Sweden. So, your voice is being heard across the world right now. And I'm guessing we're not going to get through all the questions, and so we can pick some of this up next week if that's possible with your school and things like that. If not, what we can do is read them in any case, because they're very well articulated, and I'd like to address all of the questions. I think every single one of them has merit.
Mm-hmm. I agree. Grace, who's up next?
Well, Vincent, can I say something first?
Sure.
We talked about this yesterday. We have written a total of 50 letters to our congressman, U.S. congressman. We have not received one reply from him, not one. And I told the class yesterday that, after 50 letters, it seems like one person would say, this student deserves some kind of reply. But
Response, yeah. You could, if you could get Vincent, whom the children wrote to, then Vincent possibly could get on the line and push some buttons.
okay.
Because I agree with you that children respect. They deserve respect and a response.
Exactly. Okay.
Grace, if you could see the smoke coming out of my ears in the studio right now, I'm absolutely...
He does smoke. I've seen it.
I don't smoke cigarettes or cigars or use tobacco in any way, shape, or form. But what I'm saying is...
smokes out of his ears. I've seen it.
I'm furious that our class has not been... has not received a response. So here's what I propose that you do. Grace, if you would photocopy those letters that you sent and mail them to me, I will go and the congressmen and senators who you've written them to, I will call them personally, and I will say that I have a stack of these letters, and I'm going to read them on the air, or we can read them together on the air, or the students who wrote them can read them on the air, and we will put them on notice that we expect a response, and we want our children to be protected. It is their job to protect us, and we demand it. And unfortunately, it might take embarrassing them publicly worldwide to do it, but that's fine with me. Yeah.
Well, you're already doing it with these questions. You've already started a process, and your children should feel very proud of what they're doing.
And their parents and the administration for supporting this. This is...
Yeah, that's the part that's so impressive. The fact that your administration is supporting this would suggest that you really have a good educational system in place in terms of what you're trying to accomplish.
Grace, who's up next? Who's up next?
This is Lily Rose.
Lily Rose.
Hi. How do poltergeists do things?
Poltergeist, that's a hard one. I actually did studies on ghosts and poltergeists. They're considered different, by the way. A ghost is supposed to be slightly different than a poltergeist. Let me put it this way. We don't know what that is. We have acknowledged that something is happening, whether or not it's a ghost as it's depicted in Hollywood or something else is going on. We don't really know at this point. However, there have been bank robberies that showed the robbery happening that got imprinted into the glass, the windows. And they were able to get identification without cameras on robberies and things because of the event somehow with infrared being imprinted into the structure of the glass. I'm guessing that a poltergeist, very similar.
Class, Dr. Richard Allen Miller's with us. Ryan Elementary School, Ryan, Oklahoma. Grace Thorne's teaching the class. I'm Vincent Finelli. We're learning what 6th grade students want to know. Class, educational reform starts right here at usaprepares.com. We'll be right back. Class, I was just talking during the break with the students in the superintendent's office at Ryan Public School in Ryan, Oklahoma, about how this is working. Dr. Richard Allen Miller is in Grants Pass, Oregon, on the West Coast, near the Pacific Ocean. I'm in the central part of the country in Missouri. And the students are in Ryan, Oklahoma. And Nathan, producing the broadcast, is in Minnesota. Thousands of miles of wire are necessary to make all this happen. And so this is technology working in the educational environment, educational reform. Grace Thorne's teaching a 6th grade class live with us at usaprepares.com. Grace, who has the next question for Dr. Richard Allen Miller?
Next up is Gabby.
Gabby.
Hello. How do magicians make objects disappear?
Well, oh boy, well, there's two kinds of magicians. I was going to say musicians. That's probably true, too. The first is called legerdemain, or sleight of hand. And that's a more coarse sleight of hand where they have their left hand moving and everybody's watching their left hand while the right hand is removing something that nobody notices. The second type of magician is spelled with a CK, and that it was reserved for the ultra elite of Europe for centuries, and that kind of magic is the art of changing consciousness at will, how to see reality differently. Now, how they can make a building disappear, I have no clue. There are ways to do that that are sleight of hand, and our future will be using what we would call magic with a K, which is basically technology in the future. That's what magic is. It's an advanced form of physics that we don't yet understand. It's kind of like physics with a mystery school, that it works like this, but we really don't know how it works. Kind of like when you drive an automobile. I know you're 12 years old. I know some of you have already driven a vehicle, so there it is. But you don't think in terms of how the engine works, in terms of an internal combustion engine where the gasoline is exploding and moving a piston up and then down to make the vehicle move. You simply know that if you put the key in the ignition, certain things are going to happen, and you have learned that if you do this, that will happen, kind of thing. That is magical thinking. In anthropology, they call that a magical way of thinking. Good question.
Yes.
Hard to answer.
Gabby, do you have a follow-up question for Dr. Richard Allen Miller?
No.
Okay.
No, that's a good question, though. It's magic is a place that I like to hang out and try to see if I can't change reality with my basic thoughts. And really, that is possible. And if it's possible, it's probable. There are real magicians out there. Mostly they're stage magicians, but there are the real deal sometimes. That would be a wise old man.
So what you're saying, Rick, is that the magicians distract you on stage so that you're looking where they want you to look so that you cannot see the sleight of hand that they're doing?
That is a lower form of changing consciousness. They have, because you're not actually seeing something. What you're really doing is filtering it, and you're not noticing something else happening. And that subtle difference is the difference between one form of magic and the other, and the use of high-end technology. Imagine being in the 17th century and someone pulled out a cell phone and started talking to their mother. Now that would be seemed like witchcraft. In fact, talking hundreds of miles like we are right now, millions of miles, thousands of miles, to be able to do that with technology.
Gabby, thanks for your question. Grace Thorne's class, 6th grade class, Ryan, Oklahoma, is with us for the next hour. We're doing 2 hours of 6th grade science right here at USAPrepares.com. Dr. Richard Allen Miller's with us, and we're going to be back right after the top of the hour. News and commercials, more science, more 6th grade questions, more brilliant questions from our 6th grade class, Ryan, Oklahoma. We'll be right back.
This is your call to action. Get prepared, America. Economy, survival, energy, disasters. This is USAPrepares.com. Informative radio, educational radio. Interact now by emailing instructor@USAPrepares.com or text at 434-390-7953. Class, please take your seats. Now, your instructor, Vincent Finelli.
Everyone all set? Cocked? Locked? Yep, today we're teaching elementary science. We're here to teach school and protect the children. Here we go, hour number 2 of USAPrepares.com. Dr. Richard Allen Miller's with us. He's in chair number 1. Grace Thorne is with us. And she's a 6th grade teacher at Ryan Public School, Ryan, Oklahoma. And we're continuing for the second hour with the class, the 6th grade class, who has taken over the superintendent's office in Ryan, Oklahoma, to ask their questions of Dr. Richard Allen Miller. Educational reform starts right here, right now. Grace Thorne, who's up next?
Brooke is up.
Brooke, you've got a question for Dr. Richard Allen Miller.
Hi, Dr. Miller. I was wondering, do you think it's fair that in some countries, like China, limit the number of babies you can have?
That's an important question. I don't have the ethical response to that. What I can say is that China would punish people having more than 2 children with death. And that led to the Lost Children of China, where couples would, by accident or whatever, have a 3rd child, and they would try to hide it, and the child became homeless because of the possibility of death sentence. India tried to limit production by putting birth control into the food. It was actually done as a gene splicing GMO in food, and it worked. Today, it was in transgenic soybean. And so that's one of the beans that I will not eat is transgenic soybean. I will not eat it because it does have a birth control element in it to allow people that eat it not to have children. Now, it's true. There are too many people in the world, and that was the original excuse that Monsanto and others used as a way to promote GMOs, the idea of wanting to feed the world. However, in Chattanooga, I had 400 4-year-old children growing wildflowers to feed the homeless of Chattanooga. And this was a small group of children feeding a large group of homeless adults with non-GMO foods. And everybody got it. Children are more capable of growing and taking care of adults than adults are. In fact, that may be the concept of paying it forward, where you actually have better food choices than the adults do. That's where our future is.
Brooke, do you have a follow-up question for Dr. Richard Allen Miller?
No.
Okay. Great question, Rick, because overpopulation is something that was taught to me in elementary school, and probably you too.
It was taught to me, and I'm even older than you are, Vincent. And it's there are no answers because at the time I was a kid, the American family had 2.4 children. There was a national average, and some religions, like Mormonism and Catholic, would encourage larger families because the larger the family, the more control the church had on the populace. And so in the early centuries, having large families...
I think we just lost Dr. Richard Allen Miller. So, Nathan, can you reconnect with Richard Allen Miller? So, Brooke, what Dr. Richard Allen Miller was talking about is that the church could use a greater population of people to control the families and also grow the church. And as a farmer, if you look back at farm families, you would see that farm families were larger than some other families like that might live in the city. And the reason was because we didn't have as many machines to do as much of the hard work. So we needed children to help with the farm. So a lot of farm families, yeah.
I got
Rick,
cut off there.
Yeah, Rick, I was talking.
That would be your first experience with conspiracy. Someone didn't want me to finish what I was saying.
Yeah, well, that could very well be, Rick. And I was mentioning that farm families as well were larger because it took. Yeah. So, Brooke, thank you for asking that question.
And it's good, insightful question, and I'm impressed with how astute you are for your age. I'm impressed. It's refreshing for me.
It is. Grace Thorne, who's up next?
Alexa.
Hi.
Hi, Alexa.
Run out of food and water?
Could you repeat that, please?
Could we ever run out of food and water?
Wow. What a great question, Alexa.
I don't want to think about it. Yes and no. The water is often contaminated, which means we have the water, but it's not drinkable. And so we need technologies to clean the water. And one of them is around seawater and how to convert it into drinkable, potable water, removing the salt. The oceans are teeming with all kinds of life that may be limited, again, because of what Fukushima is doing. And that would make water toxic right out of the gate to the sea life and things like that. Food is everywhere, and it's actually each place, including Ryan, Oklahoma, probably has native plants and foods that are growing right in with your weeds that are called weeds, but in fact have nutrient and value. And so it's important to learn your habitat and what plants grow, because that could, at some point, become a backup. Most of the macho men here in my area would say, well, I'll just go get my rifle and go shoot something. Well, if the grid went down and there was no food and everybody went out and got their rifle to shoot something, there wouldn't be anything out there safe or alive. call zombie land. People going nuts. That's what I used to jokingly refer to as a zombie, is East LA when they're out of food. People go crazy. Now, there's some rules that you can remember. It's 3 minutes for air, 3 days for water, and 3 weeks for food. That means you can only go 3 days without having water, and you can go 3 weeks without food before you die.
Alexa, does that answer your question, or do you have a follow-up question?
Yes, that answers my question.
Well, great. Thank you, Alexa.
Yeah.
Grace, who's up next?
Cammy?
Is that Tammy with a T?
Cammy with a K.
Oh, Cammy. Cammy, you're up next.
Hey. Oh. Does a full moon make people act weird?
Would you repeat that, please?
Does a full moon make people act weird?
I'm not getting the question exactly.
No, I'm not either, Rick.
Is it for me?
Does what make people act weird?
Does a full moon make people act weird?
Oh, Rick.
Full moons.
Yeah.
Full moon. You mean, do I turn into a werewolf or a vampire? Yes, they do. That's why they call it lunacy. We don't understand the actual physics other than probably affecting the water in your body just like it does the tides. And the hospitals will notice a complete aberrant change in behavior on the people coming in for help during full moons. They'll act lunatics. That's where the word came from. During the full moon, people act weirder. Why is probably something to do with how the moon's gravity and electromagnetic fields affect the water in your body. That's probably it. I personally like to go out and howl. How about you?
Cammie, do you have a follow-up question?
No.
And yes, Rick, there are lunatics out there, and hospitals do report. They do report that on a full moon, weird things happen in the emergency room. They get more patients during a full moon than other times because people have more accidents and hurt themselves more. So, Cammie, great question. Grace, who's up next?
Savannah?
Savannah, you're up next.
Hi, is the film footage from the Blair Witch Project real?
You want to repeat that for me, Vincent?
Is the film footage from the Blair Witch Project real?
No, it isn't. That was a movie. What they did, it's a simulation, like all horror movies, and they did the framing of the movie as, like they did Cloverfield. I don't know if you saw that movie about aliens hitting New York City. It's called Cloverfield. And they did it like the Blair Witch Project, where the camera is handled by an inexperienced cameraman purposefully to make it seem like it was more real. No, the Blair Witch Project did not really happen. It was a Hollywood attempt to create a horror movie. And they did a good job, by the way. A lot of people believed it. But no,
We're teaching class, 6th grade, elementary school, Ryan, Oklahoma, Grace Thorne's class. We've taken over the superintendent's office. Dr. Richard Allen Miller and the class, and Grace Thorne and I will be right back. A revolution in education started today, right here, with USAPrepares.com and Ryan Public School, Ryan, Oklahoma. Grace Thorne's class. The parents approved it. The principal approved it. The superintendent approved it. The students approved it. We approved it. I love it. Grace, who's up next?
Gunner.
Gunner, you've got a question for Dr. Richard Allen Miller.
Dr. Miller. Why do some people who do drugs and alcohol get addicted and some don't?
Wow.
I didn't catch that, please.
Why
Repeat
do
that.
some people who do drugs and alcohol get addicted and some don't?
You know, that's an unknown question because we are now only just now understanding what addiction might imply. You know, addiction first started with drugs and the concept of heroin and dependency on neurotransmitters in the brain. But it's like when you eat something like a supplement and you're taking, let's say, magnesium as a supplement, your body sometimes learns not to produce that because you're already getting it in your diet. And so a food dependency is created where your body no longer is producing something, and so you need to take it from the outside. That could be a drug. However, today, we now include gambling, spousal abuse, and other aberrant social behaviors as a possible form of addiction also. And it's treated very similarly to alcohol and drug dependency. The fact that someone needs to go gamble is often another type of escape. Now, the difference between it being an escape and it being an okay exposure to something like chocolate is an unknown. And because everybody is different, it has to do with the way you were raised and your belief systems. And many times, just the fact that you saw your parents abusing each other, that's where you learn how to do it. And so there is a tremendous responsibility in behavior around children like yourself, because that's where you learn how to do it also. You get it from your parents. And it's generational. Goes back to great-great-grandparents and blah, blah, blah. It's an unknown yet, and our whole concept of what addiction is and when it's acceptable, like drinking Coca-Cola. Everybody drinks Coke, and it's okay to take sugar, but it's not okay to take methamphetamine. And in my opinion, sugar is far more devastating to our culture. It's just that it's legal. And so tobacco and alcohol are the same thing, whereas marijuana is not. So I don't have a full answer on that. It is a dilemma that I'm hoping you, as you become an adult, help us toward a better answer on that.
Class, and what we're saying is that it makes no sense to do drugs. It makes no sense to consume excess sugar. As a matter of fact, many of us here at usaprepares.com don't want to eat sugar because what happens is it ramps up our body and then it lets us crash. And it really messes us up. Grace Thorne, who's next?
Grace is next.
Okay, Grace, you're up.
Has anyone ever been to Mars yet?
Have I been to Mars? No, I haven't, except through curiosity and being there in real time when it was filming what it saw. However, it is my opinion that we are already on Mars and that's another false flag that is not discussed with the public. 45 years ago was our first manned expedition to Mars. I have no idea what actually happened to that.
Rick, hold that thought. We're going to... I wish I had a picture of this. Grace Thorne and her 6th grade elementary school class have taken over the superintendent's office in Ryan, Oklahoma. Ryan Public School. Grace Thorne, who's up next?
Walter is up next.
Hi, Walter.
Would chemical warfare affect the whole world?
Oh, man.
Will
Great question.
chemical warfare, what was the word you used?
Affect the whole world.
Affect the whole world? No, not probably in terms of current things like what they're thinking they did in Iraq or Iran or wherever, Syria. But the concept of it, starting with mustard gas and some of the other things that they used in World War I and World War II, are why those weapons were considered a crime against humanity in the world and were supposedly outlawed. That's why Obama is beating his drum on that and going in to go beat them up. However, I'm not sure they actually happened as they were reported. And as such, most of the United States is against war at this time with Syria. And yet, they may end up doing it anyway. Why? Because it's not about the chemical weapons. It's the fact that war is good for business. It's terrible.
Yeah. Yeah. Class, what Dr. Miller's saying is war is evil. However, people make money selling guns and cartridges and ammunition and bombs and airplanes. Well, yeah, it restores the economy.
When everybody's broke, all of a sudden you have a war, and now you have a common goal, and it creates industry that then produces, better food, better lifestyle. It's good for business. It's not good for humanity.
Yeah. So, class, don't think that we are advocating war. We are against war. All it does is, if you need a job and you get hired building tanks, you might say, well, this is good. I'm building tanks. But those tanks are going to discharge their cannons somewhere and blow up something or people. So that part's not good at all. So, Walter, that's a great question.
Interconnection here. This is the part where, like the Nazis would have a race of people, like the Jews, that they would ostracate or try to kill so that they could take their jewelry and earnings and spread it out with fewer people. And so it's always the young that die. It's not right. War is a terrible way to resolve conflict and should be a last resort, not a first one.
Well said, Dr. Miller. Do you have a follow-up question?
No.
Okay, all right. Okay.
I understand that. It's pretty straightforward. I don't want to go to war either.
Yeah. Yeah, and I think maybe Walter is asking if chemical weapons are used, Rick, will they stay around for a long time? So, for example, in World War II, my grandfather was gassed with chlorine and mustard gas, and it affected his vocal cords from the time he was a very young man till the time he died in his 90s. So he could only talk with a whisper because it damaged his lungs and his vocal cords. The question, I think, might also be, will those chemicals dissipate? Will they be mitigated somehow? Or are they always going to be present from now on forever?
Well, it depends on which ones are used. Some of these new viruses, biological weapons is what they call them, where they would release let's say, a swine flu or a bird virus. Those things are unknowns in terms of remaining toxicity. Of course, there's always the requirements like nuclear energy of cleanup, trying to clean up the mess it created in the habitat. Mm-hmm. When you did Agent Orange to defoliate the trees, those jungles are gone now.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so I think, Walter, to answer part of your question, Dr. Miller is saying that some of the effects can be very, very long-term. Very long-term. Grace, who's up next?
Olivia.
Olivia.
Hello.
Hi.
Why do adults think witchcraft is so bad?
Well, yeah, that's an interesting question. They think witchcraft is bad in America because of Christianity. However, the closest form of witchcraft that we have in America today is the American Indian. Their belief in totemism and animism and their relationship to animals like the bear or the eagle, where a shaman can place his consciousness into one of these animals and see what that animal sees, is considered, according to some limited translations of Bibles, to be a form of the devil. I would remind everybody that the devil did not exist in historical content until Christianity. The devil is a construct of God, and God in most religions is everything, which means how could he have a rival? Because if God is everything, it really is the interpretation of man on whether that's a good thing or a bad thing. And that is arbitrary, predicated on your values and the way you're raised. Witchcraft itself in England and Europe, as it was originally practiced, was basically an old woman that knew how to use herbs. The spider up in the corner had a cobweb that would cauterize wounds better than anything. That's why the spider was kept. It had nothing to do with creepy. It had to do with the fact that in the 17th century, if you had a serious gash, you could put a cobweb on it, and it would cauterize that wound. It would stop the bleeding. Now, that became hocus pocus at some point with love potions and spells. But really, with voodoo is, again, a form of Christianity that has gone perverted with trying to integrate what we call pagan concepts and rituals into the religious practices of being a Christian. The whole thing is a mess and comes down to the fact that in Christianity there are many forms of Christianity, and they would disagree with each other. I was raised as Missouri Synod Lutheran, and they were at war with the American Synod of Lutheran Church. That's crazy. And as a child, as a kid, when I was at Washington State University, I couldn't make that distinction, and so our youth groups connected American Synod and Missouri Synod for activities, because while the church itself disagreed with each other on what was correct in doctrine, it didn't make any difference to us, because what we wanted to do was be with each other like fellowship. I think that that's what religions offer now, is to help you in achieving and maintaining your values through fellowship and people with similar beliefs. There's nothing wrong with that part of it, and that's what a church is really about. Spirituality is not what you do, but how you do it. And there you have the difference between one Christian and another.
Rick and Olivia, I'd like to add something to that. Olivia, I was raised Roman Catholic, and there are misconceptions that even adults have. For example, I met a school teacher, not a child, a school teacher, who asked me, "Do you Catholics still kill animals on the altar and drink their blood?" And the answer is absolutely not. We don't. We don't. So there are misconceptions that even adults have about practices within religion. Great question, Olivia. Do you have a follow-up question?
No.
Okay. All right, Grace Thorne, who's up next?
That we can do round two if you want to start it, but could I ask you one thing first?
Sure.
we've heard you guys talk about the tri-field meter, and so I got one, and I can't find a spot in our classroom that where the needle just doesn't go way past 100. So
100 milligauss.
How dangerous is that?
I'll let you start that one, Vincent. I don't know. That sounds to me, Grace, like a good reason for when it's a nice day taking the kids outside to do class.
Okay. Grace, I have in my hand a tri-field meter model 100XE. I'm pretty sure that's the same one you have from Alpha Lab. And I talked to the CEO of Alpha Lab, and we're going to have him on the air with us, and we're going to talk about these measurements in depth. But 100 is pegged on the milligauss meter for the magnetic range, 0 to 100. And I believe I heard you say at one time that actually goes way past the 100. So there is a lot of magnetism and electromagnetism in your classroom. And I can tell you where some of it comes from. Some of it comes from transformers. If you have computers and power supplies in your classroom, if you go near them, you'll find out with your meter, you'll find out that they are transmitting electromagnetic radiation. Cell phones do it. If you have students who are allowed to have cell phones, which I would never allow in my classroom, they're all transmitting with electromagnetic radiation. So you have lots of frequencies, lots of wavelengths, and most of it is no good. Most of it's no good. So we got to find the source of it, and we've got to eliminate it. So let's talk a little bit more about that when we come back on the other side of these few short commercial announcements, and Dr. Richard Allen Miller can address what we can do to mitigate the effects of electromagnetic radiation in your classroom. In about 8 minutes, we'll be returning the superintendent's office back to Larry Ninman. We've taken over his office for today's broadcast class on science, 6th grade science. Grace Thorne's with us, Ryan, Oklahoma. Ryan Public School in Ryan, Oklahoma. And Grace had a question about electromagnetic radiation. Her tri-field meter is pegged with magnetic radiation. And I'd like to say this before Rick give your answer. I was a computer consultant back in the 1990s, and I refused to design any computer networks in any of the schools I consulted for that used wireless Wi-Fi. And the reason for that is it is cumulative and it is additive. So if you have 30 notebook computers wireless and they're communicating with an access point in the classroom, they are all producing electromagnetic radiation, bombarding the students and the teachers. The teachers get it the most because the teachers are in the classroom the longest, so and for the most time. So that was my take on it. 15 years ago, I said I wasn't going to do it, and I felt it might produce cancers. And here we are today, and we're finding out that that truly is the case. So it makes children hyperactive, and it compromises their immune system, and it's just bad every single way you look at it, because for less money, you can use wire and connect those computers, and they'll run faster with Cat-E Ethernet cable or a level 6 Ethernet cable. Rick, your thoughts?
Okay, yeah. Well, I received Mahala Marshall-Rood is in San Antonio, Texas, and is a personal friend of mine, and she is extremely impressed with the questions. She liked number 16, if pigs are such smart animals, why can parrots talk but pigs can't? The insightfulness, the insight that these kids are experiencing and sharing is exceptional. The rites of passage are complicated. Good luck, kids. I wouldn't want to be your age. No, it's awful. And to have the futures you get to look forward to, it's going to be a brave new world. She told me that when her daughter was like you and in 6th grade, and Governor Bush, George W. Bush, he was governor then, came to the school for a visit, she had several questions for the governor. And the one she asked, she said, is it true your father and you are drug dealers, and why aren't you in jail? That was so outrageously true. that, good luck, kids, with politics. I hope we get to do this again next week or whatever. I thoroughly enjoy your questions, really.
Rick, please help us with what does Grace do about the electromagnetic radiation in her classroom?
There's not a lot. What you have to do is possibly put better grounding on the ground wire. That is, to all the electrical outlets in the room itself. You could put a special kind of shielding like they do on smart meters, which is just a little metal box that goes over the outlet, and then you take the box off when you're going to use the outlet. I'm guessing that a lot of your radiation comes from the lighting, and the kids should not be in fluorescent lighting. They should be using Kiva, K-I-V-A, where they screen certain frequency bands that are toxic to your eyes. For example, the flicker rate and things of that nature will actually hurt you. And a lot of older schools have to be rebuilt because of the asbestos that they used to use in them. And this may be an argument for redesigning a new schoolroom.
Yeah, and one other thing you can do, Grace, do you have fluorescent lighting in your classroom?
Yes, we do.
Okay, one thing you can do is you can wrap aluminum foil about 2, 3, 4 inches wide in a strip around the cathode and the anode end of the tube. I'll share with you a way to do that. I guess we'll have to do it off the air. Grace Thorne, thank you so much for being with us, class. Thank you so much for being with us today. We'd love to do it again. Should we do this again, class? Rick, what do you think?
Charge, Vincent. Thank you.
Thank you so much for being with us. I'd love to thank each one of you individually. We don't have the time to do it. But I can say, class, above all, honesty and integrity. What happens next is up to you.